Japan is one of the richest nations on Earth. It went from a war-torn country on the brink of collapse after World War II to one of the largest economies in the world in just a matter of decades. Just how did the country transform itself in such a short period of time? In this video, we will be analyzing the conditions that led to the rapid ascent of the Japanese economy. Furthermore, we will be looking at its present-day economy and discussing its strengths and weaknesses. However, in order to understand its present, we must first understand its past. On July 28, 1914, World War I commenced. Europe previously was the world's largest exporter of goods. However, the war caused international trade in Europe to halt. Japan stepped in and filled the role as the world supplier of goods, and its economy expanded. However, this growth did not last. Not long after the war, Japan's economy experienced significant decline, as the nation experienced numerous recessions due to the collapse of prices of various commodities. Suzuki Shoten was a large Japanese conglomerate that grew in size during the First World War. The company had strong connections to Taiwan. The company had large debt and was unable to pay its debt due to the newfound economic downturn. It relied on the Bank of Taiwan to bail it out, until finally in 1927, the Bank of Taiwan was no longer able to extend loans to the company. Suzuki Shoten was considered to be too big to fail, and its downfall sent shockwaves throughout Japan. The Bank of Taiwan, saddled with bad debt, was forced to ask the Bank of Japan for a bailout. The Bank of Japan refused, causing the Bank of Taiwan to collapse. This led to a panic in the financial sphere and resulted in the financial crisis of 1927, during which a series of bank runs occurred throughout Japan. In order to ease panic, the government shut down banks for several days and prevented people from withdrawing money. In addition, all debt obligations were temporarily paused. The banking crisis remained relatively contained. The main result of the financial crisis was increased concentration of wealth in large banks, as many small and medium-sized banks failed. Although the crisis was short-lived, it foreshadowed what was yet to come. October 28, 1929, the Dow dropped 13%. The following day, known as Black Tuesday, dropped another 12%. The collapse of the stock market ushered in the Great Depression. The collapse of the American economy had catastrophic effects on nations throughout the world. Japan was not spared. From 1930 to 1932, referred to as the Showa Depression, Japan experienced one of the most intense economic depressions it ever faced. Unemployment rates soared, and prices of commodities fell sharply. With the economy in turmoil and the government popularity at record lows, people turned to a new political party. A new prime minister was elected in 1931. Under this new government, a series of monetary reforms resulted in economic recovery, beginning in 1932 and lasting until 1936. Japan was one of the first nations to recover from the Great Depression. Despite this recovery, there was a dark force proliferating throughout certain factions of the military. Throughout the 1930s, economic turmoil gave birth to extremists within the military. These individuals held a strong sentiment of nationalism and espoused military expansion and advocated for an increasing role of government in the economy. The civilian population held increasingly sympathetic feelings towards this ideology, as they became cynical towards their government as a result of the turbulent economic times. On February 26, 1936, nationalist military officers attempted a coup, ultimately resulting in the assassination of numerous top government officials. The coup ultimately failed. However, after this event, this resulted in the military gaining increased influence. On July 7, 1937, war with China broke out, and the entire country was mobilized to fight the war. Political institutions disbanded as the military took complete control of the government. In the midst of the Second World War, most companies remained privately owned. However, were regulated to ensure a substantial amount of resources went towards the war effort. By 1941, largely cut off from global trade, Japan worried that it did not have enough resources to sustain the war. Therefore, it invaded Southeast Asia, starting with Vietnam, in order to conquer other nations to expand its resource supply. This angered the United States, which placed an oil embargo on Japan. No longer able to import oil from the United States, which it was heavily reliant on, Japan calculated it would run out of oil within 2 years. Japan prepared for war against the United States, gambling that the US would not have the stomach for war, and would thus negotiate instead of fight back. Despite diplomatic efforts to ease tensions, on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on US naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, drawing the US into war. Japan expanded into various countries throughout Southeast Asia over the course of the war. However, they ultimately retreated as the US and its allies launched counterattacks and won many decisive battles in the Pacific. Ultimately, Japan could not keep pace with the Americans and their allies in terms of industrial production. At home, Japan also suffered significant defeat. Relentless bombing campaigns were launched by the Allies. At first, the bombings were limited, but by 1944, fire bombings of major cities were a common occurrence. Hundreds of thousands of civilians lost their lives and numerous cities were ravaged. By far the most destructive campaign that was launched occurred on the night of March 9, 1945, known as Operation Meeting House. The mission involved over 300 B-29 super fortresses loaded with napalm incendiary bombs, which were dropped on Tokyo. Each plane contained roughly 1,520 bombs. Japanese cities, in particular Tokyo, were vulnerable to fires due to the high amount of wooden structures. This night in particular was chosen due to heavy winds, making it easier for the flames to spread and engulf the city. This night alone accounted for the death of over 100,000 civilians and left over 1 million people homeless. For days after the initial bombing, residents did not have access to food, water, shelter, and other basic necessities. This was just one of the many bombing campaigns Japan faced during the war. These bombing campaigns had two objectives: one, to damage Japan's industrial production centers, and two, to demoralize the Japanese people. To the extent these tactics were effective is debatable. However, one thing is certain: the Japanese people suffered relentlessly. No other country in history has suffered such destructive bombing campaigns. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan on August 9, 1945, and invaded Japanese-controlled Manchuria, and were on the cusp to invade mainland Japan. The war was coming to a close. In addition, the United States launched several nuclear bombs on Japanese cities, one on Hiroshima and one on Nagasaki. Japan finally surrendered. On August 15, 1945, Emperor of Japan Hirohito announced via radio broadcast to his people the news of the nation's unconditional surrender. The war was finally over. Japan was in ruins, its cities ravaged, its factories destroyed, millions of people homeless, malnourished, and mentally and physically exhausted. The task that lay ahead to rebuild the nation was a daunting one. After the war, under the command of American General Douglas MacArthur, roughly 1 million American soldiers occupied Japan until 1952. This was the first time in the nation's history it had been completely occupied by a foreign entity. How would the citizens respond? Would the occupying forces be viewed as oppressors or liberators? General Douglas MacArthur was given free rein to implement whichever policies he deemed necessary in order to rebuild the country. The initial years were rough. The nation was ravaged by inflation, unemployment, and food insecurity. Many starved to death, and the ones who did not consumed just barely enough food to survive. Due to a food shortage, most citizens were forced to turn to the black market to buy basic goods. Many were forced to sell all of their belongings to have enough money to afford these goods. The situation was dire, but worst of all, much of this was preventable. Japan's military had a huge supply of goods left over from the war. Instead of dispersing the goods among the people, corrupt military and government officials smuggled these goods into the black market to enrich themselves. While ordinary people struggled just to survive, Japanese government elites lived lavishly. Although numerous investigations were conducted into these missing goods, no one was ever convicted of any crimes. The US supplied food to Japan, keeping starvation somewhat contained. Once this issue was resolved, the next objective was to democratize the government and society at large. Many Japanese government officials expressed skepticism that the roots of democracy could ever flourish in the country. To the surprise of many, Japan adopted a new constitution in 1947, which advocated for increased democracy, women's rights, and relinquished the nation's right to wage war. In addition to political changes, economic reforms were made as well. Land reform was instituted to take land from wealthy landowners and disperse it amongst the tenant farmers. Large corporate conglomerates known as zaibutsu were broken up. Labor union membership soared. These reforms helped modernize its economy. By 1948, Japan's economy was still in turmoil, and with the Cold War surfacing, the US was concerned Japan was vulnerable to communist influence. Known as the reverse course, strengthening Japan's economy became the primary objective. In 1950, the Korean War broke out. Due to its proximity to Korea, Japan became a hub for munitions, productions, and logistics planning for the Americans to use in the war. This breathed life into its industrial sector and helped catalyze the revitalization of its economy. In 1952, American forces withdrew from Japan, although they kept their military bases in Okinawa. Japan was yet again an independent nation. Already transformed compared to what it was before, things were looking promising for the nation. After the war, Japan's economy continued to prosper. From the 1950s to the 70s, its economy experienced unprecedented growth. This is referred to as the Japanese economic miracle. The causes of this growth were numerous. The most important factor was the hard work of the Japanese people. In addition, their ability to adopt technology and manufacturing processes from other nations and innovate these technologies and processes to make them more efficient and implement them into their own workforce was also a major contributor to the nation's success. This helped their products become high quality and they were able to compete on an international level. In addition to the hard work and ingenuity of the Japanese people, various economic policies paved the way for the economic miracle as well. Prime Minister Yoshida implemented the Yoshida Doctrine, which was a set of economic policies which focused on directing the nation's resources to rebuilding the economy. Instead of focusing on spending on military defense, they redirected their military expenses towards the economy, as they could rely on the United States for military protection. In addition, Prime Minister Akita implemented the Income Doubling Plan in 1960, which aimed to double the size of the economy within 10 years by increasing government investment in the economy. Its economy soared throughout the 1960s. This growth lasted until 1973, until the international oil crisis caused growth to halt. Oil prices skyrocketed, and Japan's economy was heavily dependent on oil to fuel its economy. The increase in oil prices took a toll on the economy, leading to a recession. However, the nation was able to adapt and recover from the recession by focusing on increasing its exports, mainly cars and electronics, which have become some of the highest quality in the world. In conclusion, the economic miracle was achieved mainly through the ingenuity and hard work of the Japanese people, in combination with pro-growth economic policies implemented by its government. The nation went from being an impoverished nation on the verge of collapse to one of the largest economies in the world. It achieved what no other nation had achieved before in such a short period of time. Japan's economy continued to prosper throughout the first half of the 1980s. It seemed like its economy was unstoppable and the good times would never stop. However, like all good things, they must eventually come to an end. The 1970s was a difficult time for the world economy, especially in the United States. As discussed earlier, the 1973 oil crisis sent shockwaves throughout the global economy, as oil prices suddenly skyrocketed. In addition to the oil crises, other factors such as increased military and social spending and low interest rates led to a period of stagflation in America, which was characterized by high inflation and high unemployment. By the end of the decade, Paul Volcker became chairman of the Federal Reserve and sought to reduce inflation by dramatically increasing interest rates. In addition, newly elected President Ronald Reagan pursued expansionary fiscal policies. This combination of policy led to the rapid appreciation or rise in value of the US dollar. By 1985, the dollar had appreciated significantly in relation to foreign currencies. A higher valued currency may sound good on paper, but it can actually cause a lot of problems. The more expensive dollar made it more expensive to export American goods to other nations. Thus, America's trading partners imported less and less. This took a negative toll on America's domestic manufacturing industries, especially its automotive industry. Various companies lobbied the American government to implement policies to protect them from this shock. On September 22, 1985, financial representatives from the United States, France, Germany, and Japan met at the Plaza Hotel in New York City and signed the Plaza Accord. The goal of this deal was to devalue the US dollar in relation to the other nations' currencies in order to reduce America's growing trade deficit with its allies. The deal was ultimately successful, however, its effect on reducing its trade deficit was minimal. By 1987, the Plaza Accord was phased out as the US no longer aimed to depreciate its currency. The Plaza Accord may have been short-lived, yet it had consequences. One of its consequences was it caused Japan's currency, the yen, to sharply appreciate. The appreciation led to Japanese exports becoming more expensive, thus leading to countries buying less of their products. Japan's economy was dependent on its exports, so this took a heavy toll on its economy. To compensate for this and to try and stimulate the economy, the Bank of Japan decreased interest rates and bought securities. Loan quotas were also implemented by the Bank of Japan, forcing commercial banks to make riskier and riskier loans to meet these quotas. These factors resulted in the culmination of a stock and real estate bubble as asset prices soared. This bubble finally popped by the end of the decade, when the Bank of Japan raised interest rates in an attempt to mitigate the growth of the bubble, and stock and real estate prices tumbled. The crash ushered in what is referred to as the lost decade, as economic growth stagnated in Japan for the decade following the crash. But the stagnation has lasted far more than a decade, and its effect is still felt to this day. Japan's economy has remained stagnant since the crash. The reasons are numerous. The country suffers from deflation, meaning lack of money in circulation. Since the crash, people have been hesitant to spend money in fear the market will crash again, so they tend to save money instead of spending. This is in sharp contrast to the economy in the 80s, when people spent lavishly. Furthermore, banks have been hesitant in lending out money. Again, this is in contrast with the economy of the 80s, when banks lent money excessively. The crash was a wake-up call to the country, and it is understandable why the citizens and financial institutions became frugal and hesitant about the future of the economy. The Bank of Japan has attempted various efforts to stimulate economic growth, much to no avail. Ever since the crash, interest rates have been at 0 or near 0%. Negative interest rates were even implemented and were only disbanded as recently as 2024 in an attempt to dissuade banks from holding cash. Quantitative easing has been attempted as well, meaning the Bank of Japan bought securities in an attempt to spur economic activity. All these efforts largely failed in achieving any meaningful economic growth. In 2010, China replaced Japan as the second largest economy, and in 2024, Germany surpassed Japan in becoming the world's third largest economy. Despite its efforts, the government and central bank have failed in curbing deflation. In addition to slow economic growth, the nation faces other challenges too. Japan is facing population decline, with a population of 125.5 million people. The population is expected to drop to 105 million by the year 2050. People are choosing not to have kids for a variety of reasons. Mainly having kids is just expensive, and with the nation historically having a culture of working long hours, and with childcare being expensive, Many choose to pursue careers rather than having kids. Also, as societies become wealthier and higher educated, they tend to have less kids. In addition to this, Japan has one of the highest life expectancies in the world, exceeding 80 years. The nation has a growing number of retirees and less people to replace them due to the declining population. This trend will continue to compound as more people retire and its society grows older. This will inevitably cause a strain with maintaining funding for various retirement programs, like its national pension plan. On top of this, Japan is one of the most highly indebted nations in the world, with a debt of nearly $9 trillion US, or 263% of the nation's total GDP. The country cannot afford to create more debt to fund its entitlement programs. In conclusion, Japan certainly has its fair share of challenges. However, is its future really in dire of circumstances as many claim? Japan's economy has shown little to no growth for the last 3 decades. However, some postulate this may not be a bad thing. The idea that continuous economic growth is essential to the well-being of an economy is considered gospel by most economists. However, Japan challenges this belief. Despite having economic stagnation for the past 3 decades, Japan is still a highly developed country with an extremely high standard of living. Its citizens enjoy affordable housing, universal healthcare, and although it has been known as a nation with little work-life balance, its citizens today are working less hours and are seeing an increase in work-life balance. So what is the problem with economic stagnation if its citizens still maintain a high quality of life? Well, the country has been able to coast for a long time due to the wealth it ascertained during its economic miracle. It's unlikely that it will be able to maintain the quality of life it has now if economic stagnation persists, especially with its population in decline, which only exacerbates this issue and puts additional strain on its economic system. Most countries in the world are forecasted to experience population decline in the near future, although Japan is just one of the first to experience it. Although population decline will inevitably put strain on the global economy, shouldn't we all strive to evolve our economic system to one that does not rely on continuous growth to sustain itself for survival? Japan may very well find innovative solutions to these debacles and may serve as a guide for other nations to adopt these same solutions when they inevitably face the same issues. In summary, Japan certainly faces its shared challenges it must overcome. However, this is a nation that has overcome a lot of adversity in the past. From being on the brink of collapse after World War II, the country did what no other country had ever done and transformed every aspect of its society and became one of the wealthiest nations in the world in just a matter of decades. The nation serves as a unique model, and I look forward to seeing what it continues to accomplish into the future.